Lead singer Ozzy Osbourne has died at the age of...
The sun rose on July 22, 2025, to a world forever changed by the news that John Michael Ozzy Osbourne, 76 years old, indefatigable rock icon, and beloved family man, had slipped quietly into the night. Known to millions as the Prince of Darkness, Ozzy's legacy stretches far beyond the thunderous riffs and dramatic stage theatrics. He was, at his core, a storyteller, a man who wore his vulnerabilities as proudly as his leather and studs, who taught us that even in the deepest shadows, the human spirit can shine. A family's final embrace. When the end came, it was devoid of spectacle, no screaming crowds, no blinding lights, just the gentle hum of love and shared history. In a softly lit room of his Los Angeles home, photographs of every era of his blitzing career watched over him, from the ragtag Birmingham club shows to Wembley Arena's sold-out glories. Sharon Osbourne, his wife of 44 years, sat beside him, their fingers entwined as they had been for decades. Around the bed stood his 5 children, Amy, Kelly, Jack, Lewis, and Elliot, joined by grandchildren, close friends, and caregivers who had become family. Between them they wove a circle of memories, Sharon whispering the time Ozzy collapsed laughing mid-interview, Kelly recalling her father's off-key but joyful renditions of lullabies, Jack recounting the time Ozzy surprised his children by teaching them riffs on an old acoustic guitar. There were tears, yes, but also laughter, because Ozzy, ever the showman, would have demanded nothing less. As the morning light filtered through Park Avenue's curtains, Ozzy took his final breath surrounded by the very people who had carried him through triumph and turmoil alike. His passing was at once profoundly private and deeply universal, a rock legend's end, softened by the intimate warmth of family love. From Birmingham's backstreets to metal's frontier. Ozzy's story began far from the stadium spotlights, in the soot-streaked streets of post-war Aston, Birmingham. Born December 3, 1948, into a working-class family of Irish descent, he learned early that life could be brutal. His father, Jack, worked double shifts at a factory, while his mother, Lillian, balanced jobs cleaning houses with caring for her 5 children. Money was tight, but the house hummed with music, the crackle of BBC radio, the bluesy licks of American imports, and the spirited croons of Lonnie Donegan and Little Richard. At 15, Ozzy left school to take on odd jobs, loading crates at the docks, sweeping floors at a paint factory, and even stoking coal furnaces. He was tall, gangly, and a bit lost, but find a battered guitar in a friend's shed, he discovered his refuge. Those first tentative chords in the attic of a terraced house set him on a collision course with destiny. In 1967, he answered an ad placed by guitarist Tony Iommi seeking a singer. Originally called Earth, the band cut its teeth in the cramped confines of a church hall, experimenting with fuzz pedals, down-tuned guitars, and lyrics that drew on gothic horror, social upheaval, and the supernatural. By 1969, Earth had shed its name and emerged as Black Sabbath, a moniker borrowed from a local horror film. Their debut album, released in February 1970, was a revelation, riffs that rumbled like distant thunder, vocals that wailed like lost souls, and themes that tapped directly into Cold War anxieties and personal alienation. Forging a new sound, Black Sabbath's early years. Black Sabbath's first 3 albums, Black Sabbath, 1970, Paranoid, 1970, and Master of Reality, 1971, did more than invent heavy metal, they gave shape to the unspoken fears of a generation. War Pigs decried the military-industrial complex with biting irony, Iron Man painted an apocalyptic vision with a riff that would become timeless, Fairies Wear Boots blended psychedelia with bluesy swagger. In clubs across England, hardened steelworkers and disenchanted students alike found catharsis in Sabbath's crushing sound. Ozzy's voice, at once plaintive and primal, cut through the low-end onslaught with an almost otherworldly quality. He didn't just sing, he summoned. Whether bellowing, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, or crooning a melancholy ballad, he displayed an emotional range unexpected in rock's nascent underground. On stage, he was equal parts shaman and jester, flinging himself onto amps, riding drum risers like a wild beast, and delivering one-liners between songs that kept audiences on edge. Tours became legendary tests of endurance. 1971's U.S. trek saw the band crisscrossing the continent in a windowless van, subsisting on roadhouse food and the occasional underground tap. Yet Sabbath's reputation spread by word of mouth, turning small clubs into major venues and making them the first metal band to headline Madison Square Garden by 1974. Darkness and light, personal struggles in the spotlight. Fame's glare cast long shadows, and Ozzy's personal life was fraught with turmoil. By the late 1970s, the relentless grind of world tours, flying from sweaty club basements to cavernous stadiums, and the era's rock and roll excess took their toll. Ozzy found himself leaning ever harder on amphetamines to keep up the pace, alcohol to blur the edges of exhaustion, and heroin to silence the constant hum of anxiety. Paranoia crept in between the chords, depression settled in the gaps, and relationships that once felt rock-solid began to splinter under the weight of his addictions. In 1979, after years of mounting tension both on and off stage, Black Sabbath reluctantly announced they would go their separate ways with Ozzy at the mic, a fracture that stunned fans worldwide. Yet, even as the door closed on that first chapter, Ozzy refused to disappear. Under the guidance of Sharon, his future wife, manager, and fiercest champion, he resolved to rebuild. Their partnership became a lifeline. Sharon handled negotiations, bookings, and publicity while Ozzy focused on songwriting and, crucially, on confronting his demons. Enter Randy Rhoads, a young guitar virtuoso whose classical-inspired solos added a new dimension to Ozzy's raw, confessional lyrics. Blizzard of Oz, 1980, didn't just chart, it exploded, riding the surge of singles like Crazy Train, with its unforgettable riff and urgent chorus, and Mr. Crowley, a dark meditation on obsession and power. The album was Ozzy's rebirth, the world's reminder that he was far from finished. But triumph soon gave way to tragedy. In March 1982, a chartered plane carrying Rhoads crashed outside Leesburg, Florida, killing the guitarist instantly. Ozzy was on tour. When he heard the news, he was devastated. Unable to perform, he retreated into songwriting, channeling his grief into Diary of a Madman, a haunting track that blended sorrow-laden piano lines with lyrics that felt like a private confession. Over the next decade, Ozzy enlisted guitar heroes Zakk Wylde and later Jake E. Lee, each bringing fresh energy. Wylde with his thunderous pinch harmonics and Lee with his bluesy attack. Albums like No Rest for the Wicked, 1988, and No More Tears, 1991, showcased Ozzy's versatility. The former flirted with blues rock swagger, the latter wove orchestral flourishes around themes of personal accountability and redemption. Through it all, he remained unwilling to be pigeonholed, proving that even as his demons stalked him, his creativity could light the way forward. Ozzy's battles extended beyond addiction. In 2003, a high-speed ATV accident on his Tennessee estate shattered bones in his neck, back, and arms, forcing him to learn even the simplest movements again. Ever candid, he documented his rehabilitation, crediting physical therapy and sheer stubbornness with getting him back on his feet. Then, in 2020, he shared news of a Parkinson's disease type 2 diagnosis. Rather than retreat, he posted scanned photos and videos of his tremors, using social media to demystify the illness. Fans rallied, medical charities saw surges in donations, and Ozzy's transparency turned what could have been a private struggle into a source of communal strength. Through darkness and light, he showed that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to carry on despite it. The Homecoming, Ozzy's final curtain call. In June 2025, history returned to its starting point. V Park Soccer Stadium in Birmingham, where decades earlier he'd holed out his early metal baptism, welcomed Ozzy Osbourne for what would become his last public performance. Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward, the original architects of Black Sabbath, stood flanking him. The stage itself seemed built for the occasion. A custom hydraulic throne allowed Ozzy to stand tall despite Parkinson's-related weakness, and lighting rigs bathed the audience in the band's signature shades of green and purple. As the first riff of Black Sabbath thundered through the speakers, gasps rippled across the crowd. For many, it was the first time in years they heard those opening notes live. For others, the moment crystallized a lifetime of fandom. Ozzy's voice cracked at first, raw and vulnerable, then steadied into a surprising clarity. Song after song, from the doom-laden groove of Into the Void to the triumphant chord changes of Heaven and Hell, he and his bandmates recreated the alchemy that had appended rock music. By the encore, Paranoid ignited an eruption of applause. Ozzy, struggling slightly with the lyrics, smiled through tears as the audience sang his lines back to him. He bowed deeply, eyes closed, soaking in the sea of faces illuminated by phone lights. That night transcended mere nostalgia, it was communal catharsis. Nearly 40,000 fans united in a farewell ritual that recognized not an end, but a crescendo in a life defined by resilience. When the final chord faded into the Birmingham night, it felt less like a goodbye and more like a benediction, decades of devotion distilled into a single, unforgettable moment. A global outpouring of grief and gratitude. Within moments of the announcement, social media was awash in tributes. Hashtag Long Live Ozzy and hashtag RIP Ozzy trended worldwide as fans shared stories of first concerts, battered vinyls, and life-changing lyrics. Murals appeared overnight in Sao Paulo, New York, and Tokyo. Radio stations curated marathon playlists, while streaming services reported record spikes in Sabbath and solo streams. Musicians of every stripe paid homage. Post Malone posted a video of himself weeping after performing Mama, I'm Coming Home. Billie Eilish cited Ozzy's fearless self-expression as a guiding light. Even classical composers noted Sabbath's chromatic riffs as precursors to modern film scores. In Birmingham, a candlelit vigil outside Ozzy's childhood home drew thousands. City officials unveiled plans for the Ozzy Osbourne Center for Music Innovation, scholarships, masterclasses, and a museum dedicated to the evolution of heavy metal. Meanwhile, the Terrace House on Maple Grove Terrace received a commemorative plaque and a small public garden echoing the moorland he so loved. What lies ahead, continuing the legacy? Black Sabbath's remaining members face a future without their emblematic frontman. While talk of reunion tours has faded into memory, their music, Paranoid, Volume 4, Heaven and Hell, remains immortal. New generations discover Sabbath in dusty record store bins and algorithmic playlists, each riff a revelation. For the Osbourne family, the challenge is intimate, to grieve Ozzy the patriarch while stewarding Ozzy the legend. Sharon, ever the matriarch, will guide memorial initiatives and shape the narrative of Ozzy's life with honesty and depth. Kelly's platform ensures his story reaches millions in nuanced interviews, while Jack's musical collaborations keep his spirit alive in fresh compositions. Grandchildren, now custodians of family lore, will share anecdotes, of Ozzy teaching them to fish, dancing to Motown on the kitchen floor, and reading ghost stories by candlelight. These small moments, once overshadowed by public spectacle, will reveal the heart behind the legend. A final legacy, carrying the flame forward. Ozzy Osbourne's life was a study in contrasts. Thunderous riffs versus whispered confessions, public spectacle versus private tenderness, unfiltered chaos versus unwavering resilience. His journey from coal-smoke Birmingham to global stages teaches us that greatness often walks hand in hand with hardship and that survival itself can be an act of artistry. Today, as fans light candles, tune up guitars, and revisit those immortal albums, they do more than honor a legend, they continue a dialogue Ozzy began. That vulnerability is strength, that darkness can birth creativity, and that the bonds of family and fandom can outlast even the fiercest storms. Whether through covers of War Pigs, in suburban garages or late-night headphone sessions with No More Tears, his voice remains a guiding beacon. His children and grandchildren will guard his memory, sharing stories of the man behind the myth, the father who doled out bedtime toasts of hot cocoa, the husband who never missed an anniversary, the granddad who taught tiny hands to strum the first chord. Meanwhile, musicians and writers will parse his lyrics and licks for inspiration, scholars will dissect his impact on popular culture, and new fans will discover in his work a mirror for their own struggles. Though the amps are silent and the spotlight dimmed on Ozzy himself, The echoes of his legacy resonate in every power chord and heartfelt lyric. He taught us that living fully, warts and all, is the grandest performance of all. And in that lesson, his spirit remains immortal.